I'm willing to meet my creator and answer for every shot that I took.
I'll pick it up. Drop it.
Yeah, I could tell you whether he drops it or not, but I'm not going to do that. American Sniper, it's a major, major hit at the box office. I mean, I saw it. Frankly, I found it to be stylized, a little predictable, not enormously inspiring, but that's just a personal opinion. It's cinema, it's theatre, of course. What I didn't find it to be was Nazi-like or barbaric. But according to deep thinkers such as Michael Moore and Seth Rogen, that's just what it is. Joel Pollack, editor-in-chief of Breitbart.com, he joins us from Los Angeles, the heart of Hollywood. Look, I mean, the idea that this movie is somehow akin to the Nazi movie in Inglourious Bastards, where there is a Nazi sharpshooter just murdering American soldiers, is obscene, frankly. It's absolutely grotesque that anyone, Michael Moore and Seth Rogen and the rest of them, would make such a comment.
Right. Well, Seth Rogen has gone from hero to zero as far as freedom of expression is concerned. I mean, here he is sort of trying to ostracize the film, and just a few weeks after he himself was subjected to the same treatment, basically, by the North Korean government. I mean, he's gone from a champion of freedom of expression to a sort of champion of egotistic, artistic narcissism. I mean, he basically doesn't want to share the spotlight with Clint Eastwood and Bradley Cooper, so it's kind of sour grapes on his part. But the Moore comment is more serious because Moore, of course, occupied a special place in Hollywood as the anti-war filmmaker during the Bush years, and he is now refusing to relinquish that place, not just personally, but thematically. He doesn't like the idea that Americans are flocking to see a pro-war, or at least a movie that is not anti-war, a film. And so you've got here Hollywood's left fighting back against what actually has happened over a few years, which is that Hollywood has become less harsh towards the military, has in fact embraced the military on a number of occasions. And that's something that, although Hollywood hasn't made any kind of political shift, that's something that you've seen. Certainly its attitude towards the military has softened, become more sympathetic. And Americans are flocking to this movie because they're refreshed by it. They find it's the heroes they live with every day. There are veterans in millions of families around America, and this is what people want to see. And they're tired of being talked down to, told that they have to feel a certain way about the war, that they have to feel a certain way about the military. And Michael Moore wants to protect that little fiefdom he built for himself, and he's utterly dismayed that it's going away.
Well, I can't attribute personal motive the way you can. I'm sorry, I don't know if it's all about their self-possession of certain movies and genre. I would say, without giving too much away, that in the movie there is a very, very sympathetic character who expresses huge reservations about the war. And he's a hero. And he's obviously not a pro-war cliche. Clint Eastwood may be a conservative, he may be a Republican, but his movies on Iwo Jima, for example, in the American-Japanese War, which I have to say I thought were far better movies, they're very nuanced. Again, they show the horror of war. And we have actors in this movie as well who, this is not, I don't know, Sylvester Stallone or someone. I mean, these are people that are the real thing. They know how to act. And it's a complex piece. It's not just a simple Americans good, everyone else bad.
If you want to understand Clint Eastwood's approach to war and violence, there's no better film than Gran Torino, which I have seen a number of times. And in it, he basically says there are moral questions about the use of force and the use of violence which don't involve guilt. The fact that you used force does not mean you should be guilty about it. There are other questions, but that's not one of them. And in fact, in that movie, he has his confrontation with a priest who expects him to be guilty for all the people he's killed in Korea in his earlier career in the military. And he doesn't feel any guilt about that. He feels guilt about other things, the way he treated his wife, the way he treated his family. And that's basically the theme that runs throughout Clint Eastwood's work in Hollywood about violence and war. He does it very, very delicately, and that's really what the American left can't stand. They want the use of force itself to be surrounded by this aura of guilt. And I have friends who are Navy SEALs. My wife is in the Navy. I've people who, in my life, who've served overseas and faced incredible odds. Some of them are anti-war. I mean, I'm not speaking for my wife, of course, who's very gung-ho, but you know, there are some people who go and they serve and they kill, and they expose themselves to great danger, and they come back and when abstracted from the situation, they say, you know, I don't agree with what we were doing over there, but I have a duty to my country and I do it. And it's possible to separate those two things without this feeling of guilt, which can be crippling, and which is often, just as jingoistic attitudes are often voiced by people who are far from the action, so guilt too is often voiced by people who are far away from the action. And I think that's something Clint Eastwood wants to make clear, that this sort of presumption, this prejudice that Hollywood brings to violence and to war is something that's not necessarily warranted.
Well, it's fairly new, of course, because historically Hollywood was extremely supportive of war. The Second World War, Hollywood was involved in being part of the war effort. You would agree, though, look, putting aside, I think Michael Moore is a fool. I think he's a propagandist and a fool. And Seth Rogen, I've only, I think, seen one movie. I saw the interview. It seemed to be mainly jokes about masturbation and pornography. I mean, why should I care what he has to say about anything? But there is an intelligent critique of America's recent wars, which involve, some would say, not liberating a continent, but invading a nation. And some of what Michael Moore says, and he's backtracking a bit, isn't he? Because first of all, it was snipers are cowards. Well, quite clearly, this man, who was a Navy SEAL, is not just on the rooftops with a gun. He's also involved in direct face-to-face combat with people. So it's a stupid thing to say. But when he talks about an invader, and they're not heroes, it's those who are defending their country who are heroes. Is there any point to be made there? Did that hit home at all?
I think Americans do have doubts about the war's overall effort, and you can see that in earlier movies. There's a great movie with George Clooney called Three Kings, which is about the first Gulf War.
Wonderful movie,
There you see Americans sort of adrift in the Middle East and struggling to deal with this shattered society and tyranny and Islam and things that they just are barely beginning to understand, these soldiers as they're over there. You'd have to make a more complex movie about the Iraq War because there Americans really were deeply embedded, and Canadians as well. And as I understand, as we speak today, Canadians have taken the first direct fire of any Western military.
Well, Afghanistan.
Yes, yes, in Afghanistan. But I mean, the Canadians are right there with us, and you know, this is something that's complicated. You have to really look at it more carefully. But still, there are certainly doubts that Americans have been willing to express about film, and that Americans have been willing to pay to see. I think the success of some of the Vietnam films in the 1980s tells you that there are serious misgivings Americans are prepared to express and prepared to share. But I think what Americans don't like is, especially in the wake of 9/11, this idea that war is inherently ipso facto and a priori, to throw around some gratuitous Latin terms, that war is wrong. And it isn't wrong necessarily, and our enemies certainly don't feel it's wrong. They have no qualms about advertising their own brutality, putting children on video, executing prisoners and things like that. So we need to actually take a hard look at what the use of force is for. Confucius, in advising the Chinese governors, thousands of years ago, said that war is one of the arts of life. I mean, war is around, and war is something you have to train to do whether you're in peace or not. And war is not something you obviously want to engage in. Confucius, in many ways, was anti-war and questioned rulers. Why are you invading this country? What right do you have? But war as an art was an essential part of what it meant to be a well-rounded human being. You had to be able to practice it and be prepared for it so you could defend yourself. And that's something that the left in the United States and the world in general has swept under the rug.
Possibly. Confucius and, as you say, gratuitous Latin terminology. That isn't bad for an interview on Sun News. Hey, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you very much indeed.
Good to be with you.